So, after completing our spring and early summer journey through the six paramitas, today we're stepping onto a kind of late summer bridge where we're going to move through a couple of standalone sessions, I guess I'll call them, before we dive into a new series this fall. And as I usually do, I wanted to align the theme for these sessions with the season we're in, or at least an aspect of the season we're in. And so, reflecting on late summer, to me, alongside everything else we've talked about that comes with this time of year, there's this particular quality of, we could call it abundance, that can come with this time of year, at least where I live. Those of us who have gardens, the gardens are heavy and getting close to harvest time. There's a lot of light from early morning until late into the evening. Wild berries, earlier this week I was delighting in how juicy and sweet those are. And so there is this kind of fullness that can be present at this time of year. And yet, even amidst all of this abundance, I was noticing that can be challenging to receive and kind of rest in that fullness. And I reflected on that and was sensing how, in no small part, I think that's because these days we live inside a kind of engine that runs on more, right? So more to do, more to have, more to become, more to achieve. And this, what can feel relentless kind of drive towards more, is especially pervasive now because it's built in to our economic and political systems, for example. It's built into our media. It is the topic of so much of these many, many streams of advertising that we're flooded with. It can be part of our work or our professional cultures. And so, of course, it makes sense that over the years, a little of that insatiable quality can find its way inside our beliefs and our behaviors and our perspectives until it can show up in most, if not all, aspects of our lives, even if it's not at the front of consciousness. And just in case you have no idea what I'm talking about here, this can be something as simple as finally getting the thing or reaching the goal that we'd been so focused on. And then almost before we've even fully registered it, we're looking past it, right? We start leaning in the direction of the next thing. So I'm going to check in. Is this sounding familiar to anybody here? Yeah. Okay. So we're on common ground with this, my friends, and I think that just points to this is in no way some kind of personal problem. The issue is that perpetual forward leaning has a cost. It doesn't only keep us busy, although it certainly can do that, but more broadly, it can change the way we relate with ourselves and even the world at large. And over time, even a full, abundant life can start to feel as though it's lacking something, even if we can't quite put our finger on what that thing is. And although our modern world amplifies this enormously for all the reasons that I just named, the truth is this restless dissatisfaction has been part of the human experience for pretty much as long as we've been keeping track, right? So it is an old, almost universal human pattern. And there's some good news that comes with that, actually, because like many old, almost universal human patterns, there's a Buddhist teaching for this. So the Pali word for it is santuṭṭhi, which is usually translated as contentment. And as we often do, I'm going to take a little time to unpack that word because it's easy to hear contentment as something like settling for less, maybe, or complacency. Could even be perceived as giving up on growth or evolution. So, right away, I want to say clearly, santuṭṭhi is not any of that. And I'll also just acknowledge it is not a belief that whatever is here is always enough. Okay, so yes, sometimes something really is missing, or a need is not met, or conditions need to change, or maybe we just have big dreams and aspirations. And santuṭṭhi doesn't ask us to set any of that aside or pretend otherwise in any of those scenarios. What it does ask is whether what may be missing has to get in the way of our ability to recognize what's already here. So, in this context, contentment is freedom from that reflex of never enough. And it's the capacity to actually land with what is here and to receive that goodness, or we could say sufficiency, that may already be present, rather than treating this moment as something we need to get through on the way to that greener grass that we are sure is just around the corner. And as we drop into this teaching, I want to start with a line from the Dhammapada, which is one of the best loved collections of the Buddha's short verses on how to live. And in it, he names a handful of things, and he calls each one the greatest of its kind. And in the middle of that list, he says, contentment is the greatest wealth. Now that really struck me. And I noticed he did not say contentment is calming, or pleasant or admirable or good for your blood pressure. He calls it wealth. And not just a little wealth, the greatest wealth. And so, I think it's really worthwhile to pause and reflect on that a bit more deeply. Because most of the ways that we're taught to think about wealth have to do with quantity, right? So, how much we earn, or how much we own, or how much more we can afford or acquire. But here, the Buddha is pointing to a very different measure of wealth. Because as we've already touched on, and then we see this, examples of this all over our society, someone can have a great deal and still suffer with that feeling of not enough. So we see that abundance and contentment, not necessarily the same thing. And it wasn't just the Buddha that observed this. Lately, I've been reading the Tao Te Ching, and there's a line there. I came across this, I was amazed, that recognizes pretty much the same insight. So it says, he who knows he has enough is rich. So these two ancient traditions, coming from different places in a lot of ways, landed on this remarkably similar awareness that more doesn't automatically bring us any closer to feeling that we have enough. And this brings up a pretty obvious question, that if more isn't what's needed to bring us real contentment, what is? So I looked a little more deeply into the teachings on santuṭṭhi, and I found the guidance there to be surprisingly practical in response to this question. I found that there are really two movements in the practice of contentment. I'm going to underline that word practice. So first is learning to recognize when enough is actually present. And then, just as important, is letting ourselves feel it. So we're going to take these two movements one at a time. In one of the early teachings on santuṭṭhi, the Buddha describes being content with the basic things that sustain a life, which for the monastics that he was speaking to were things like food, shelter, clothing, right? Like the real basics. And well, obviously, we're living in a very different time than wandering monastics in ancient India. I think the wisdom underneath his teaching is pretty timeless. And he pointed to that from the perspective of this teaching, santuṭṭhi, contentment is a capacity to know when something is sufficient. Or if we put that even more simply, to recognize when a need is met. And I think this helps us understand why he might call contentment the greatest wealth. Because if I always need even a little more, it could be money, time, one more thing to fall into place, before I can feel satisfied, then enough keeps getting pushed a little farther somewhere out ahead of me. Whereas contentment brings enough back within reach from right here. So one very practical inquiry this teaching offers us is what is actually needed here. Not what would be ideal, such a tendency, or what would make this even better, but what is actually needed. And I tried this on a little throughout these last couple of weeks. And when I look through this lens, maybe what I accomplished today is enough. Even though there are so many things that are still on that to-do list. Or maybe this home, this body, this ordinary moment doesn't have to be something else before I can inhabit and appreciate it just as it is. And again, this doesn't mean we stop growing or evolving or aspiring. It's really about learning to distinguish between a real need, like there's an actual need here, and that deeply conditioned, almost automatic pull towards more. So that's the first movement, recognizing when a need is met. But there's a second, because knowing that intellectually isn't the same as being able to feel it, right? And there's a well-known Buddhist image that illustrates this in a really powerful way. Some of you, I think, will be familiar with this, of the hungry ghost. So the hungry ghost is this being with this enormous, aching, hungry belly and a throat that's as thin as a needle. So even if it were surrounded by nourishment, it can't take it in. I guess one way to think about it, it's kind of an embodiment of that engine of more, always needing more. And there's a psychologist and a neuroscientist, a great teacher named Rick Hanson. I love his work, and he describes something that I see as very connected to this when he's talking about the negativity bias. So the negativity bias, if you aren't familiar, is our very, very human tendency to register and remember what's difficult or threatening or lacking way more readily and for longer than we do with what's good or sufficient. And again, not a personal flaw, completely comes pre-installed. This is how we are wired from an evolutionary perspective. And as he says, our brains tend to be kind of like Velcro for the tough stuff and Teflon for the good stuff. So one of the practices that he teaches in response to this reality is called taking in the good. And essentially, it means that when something is genuinely nourishing, we get intentional about noticing it, staying with it way longer than we would habitually, and soaking it in. And that really simple practice can become a very practical part of cultivating contentment. So enough is here. Rather than just habitually rushing past, we let that land and we soak it up. And I'm going to share with you one place this lives for me. Um, this isn't totally new information, but I have this pretty strong perfectionist aspect to myself that I am working on. You know, it's a recovery process. Maybe it's a lifelong recovery process. And along with that comes this habit of scanning for what's missing or substandard. And this can happen when I'm working, a piece of work. I scan it in that way. Sometimes I reflect on my day. I scan it in that way. Even in moments or conversations with people I care about or love. And if I don't catch it, if this is beneath the line of my awareness, then whatever may have been joyful or nourishing can kind of fade into the background. While the one thing that could have been different, or even harder for me, better, is like lit up in neon. That's just drawing my attention. And it's kind of wild how quickly that kind of perspective can dilute the goodness in a really good life. And it's not because anything has been taken away or is lacking really in a global perspective, but it's because I am looking through, in a way, a lens of lack. So, lack is what I see. And then sometimes, more times lately, which I'm very grateful for, I catch it. And I stop that habitual process of scanning and I let my attention widen and I start to intentionally receive what's here. And although nothing gets added to the equation when I shift my perspective like this, everything else about the experience changes. Because enough becomes available again. It's right here. I can touch it. And so, as you can see, this is a really live practice edge for me, as well. And to deepen our embodied understanding of santuṭṭhi, I'm going to take us to the river when the salmon are running. If you've ever visited a river during the salmon run, you'll know that it can be unusually common to encounter bears. And now bears are generally, they're pretty solitary animals, okay? And when food is scarce, they are very likely to guard access to it. If they come across each other, there could be some conflict. They will compete over access to resources. But when the salmon are plentiful, something changes. And I have seen this personally. You can sometimes see bears feeding surprisingly close together all along the same stretch of river. Pretty relaxed. Now, they're still bears, so there's still hierarchy. There can still be conflict. It doesn't take away that aspect entirely, but when there is enough food, there isn't the same pressure to defend or dominate. And I think that's really interesting because scarcity doesn't only affect whether the bear is hungry, it changes its whole relationship to the world around it. And under conditions of fullness, bears become more at ease, they become more tolerant, they can even become more cooperative. And of course, we humans, we have our own version of this. When we're moving through life with that underlying sense of not enough, we too can become guarded and protective in ways usually subtler. No, not always, but not so different. So I think about this a lot. One example, when it comes to time, when my sense is there's not enough time, every interruption, every request all starts to feel like a threat to my nervous system. Or when there's not enough money, for example, when there's not enough love, when I feel like there isn't enough attention or security, it's so easy to find myself mistrusting or comparing or keeping score or defending or caught in kind of an anxious loop. And even when that guarding isn't around something concrete like fish in a river, in the body, it can take on this very similar posture of being braced, of leaning forward, of scanning for what might be missing or what needs to be secured next. So, a much less connected and a much less present way of being in a moment. And, I want to keep this honest. If the river's empty, the bear needs more salmon. That's real. Santuṭṭhi isn't asking us to pretend that where there might really be lack, that there's fullness. What is being offered here is that when nourishment is available, can we recognize it? Can we receive and digest it? And can we take even a few moments to be satisfied and at ease on purpose? And this is part of this incredible freedom of santuṭṭhi. Not a project to convince ourselves that we should need less, but learning to recognize when enough is already here. And then allowing that recognition to change the way we inhabit the moments of our lives. So, as we turn towards our practice, today, what I hope we're bringing with us is the awareness that contentment is not about settling for a smaller life. And it's not asking us to stop dreaming or growing or creating or working towards what matters. This teaching is asking us to learn to recognize when the need is met and when enough is here, even just for a moment. And just as importantly, to let that recognition actually reach us. To pause long enough for the body and the heart to receive what the mind is very conditioned to just move past. And from there, we're still going to move towards what comes next. I mean, this is part of the unfolding. But it becomes possible to do it with less grasping and a little less of that restless sense that our best lives are perpetually waiting to begin somewhere just a little farther down the road. So in our meditation today, we're not going to try to become content. We're going to practice recognizing sufficiency in direct experience and exploring that question, what is actually needed? And if we find that enough is present, we'll see what happens when we let ourselves receive it. Okay? So let's practice, my friends. And doing whatever is needed to prepare your body for a period of stillness. And just taking your time, settling into a posture that feels both supported and awake. And when you're ready, you could allow the eyes to close, or you might choose to just soften the gaze. And we'll begin by just drawing the attention inward and noticing that the body is breathing. And without in any way changing or managing it, just sensing this living flow of the body breathing itself. And as you sit and breathe, inviting the body to soften, to become heavy, noticing the ways you are supported. Perhaps setting an intention that just for these few moments, what would it be like for the body and the mind and the heart to rest in the same place at the same time? And from this place of being grounded, held, I'll invite you to bring to mind some small, workable place in your life where you can feel that engine of more. So, some place where the feeling of not enough is familiar. Maybe it relates to something you want to improve, how you relate to the time that's available in your calendar, some project that feels like it's been unfinished for way too long. So just touching lightly into some familiar place of longing for more. And then letting the story that comes with that kind of fade into the background. And getting curious about what not enough feels like in the body. Maybe it's a tightness, bracing, a leaning forward. Notice the posture. Could be just this sense of restlessness, swirling, a looping. So nothing to fix or change here. Just getting very familiar with what not enough feels like in your body. And now letting that situation go. Maybe a big deep breath. And returning again to this moment. Feeling the weight of the body supported. And then opening to another inquiry. Right now, in this moment, where might enough already be here? Is there enough air to breathe? Is there enough support to let some part of the body soften or relax just a little more? Is there enough time for an unhurried breath? In this actual moment, what is actually needed? Is there already enough? And anywhere you can connect to feeling enough, let it sink in. And notice what happens when the body registered nothing more is needed right now. And staying with it, noticing if part of you already started to move ahead. coming back into enough. Soaking it in like warm rain in soft soil. And now letting go of even the word or the idea of enough. Nothing to practice. Taking some moments just to rest, to be held, to breathe. Opening to and receiving this moment just as it is. We'll close with a poem by Rosemarie Watala-Trommer called Beyond Perfect. It is not the best raspberry. There have been berries sweeter, more perfectly formed. Berries I've harvested warm from the bush. Berries that have made me close my eyes and rhapsodize about the perfect, juicy, bulbous joy of raspberry. Still, this small and fragile fruit, packaged in a plastic shell, sings ripe and red on my tongue. And on this January morning, it brings news of sunshine somewhere. I delight in its tartness, its bite. Bless what is good enough. Not only bless, but cherish. Cherish this good enough morning with its good enough fruit. In this kitchen cleaned well enough for this good enough woman living into the good enough day. My mouth slightly puckered, taste of raspberries still bright on my tongue. taking your time to emerge from this practice. Perhaps inviting a little movement into the body, stretch, opening your eyes only when you're ready. Thank you for your practice, my friends.